is the Vulcan Absolute Competition Kettlebell. And I'm Britt, here to review these kettlebells and give you my honest opinion. As a world champion, 7-time master of sport, and kettlebell coach of over a decade, it's safe to say I know my way around a kettlebell. Vulcan sent over an 8, 12, 16, and 24 kg kettlebell for me to use in this review. That being said, they did not pay me for this review, and my opinions are my own. In today's video, we'll talk about the design and features of the Vulcan kettlebell. We'll compare the Vulcan kettlebell to a few different types of kettlebells. We'll take a look at the value, the pros and cons, who this kettlebell is for and who it's not for. And finally, I'm going to take the Vulcan kettlebells for a spin and share a few of my favorite kettlebell exercises. If this video is helpful for you, be sure to like, subscribe, and most importantly, hit the bell icon so you get notified when I release a new video. And now, let's get started. Let's talk about the design and features of the Vulcan kettlebell. First up, let's take a look at these awesome bright colors. I've never seen competition kettlebells that have this bright of paint used on them, and I really love it. It makes me want to lift these kettlebells, and they look great on camera. The Vulcan kettlebells were designed by a kettlebell coach and Kettlebell Sport lifter, so obviously a lot of thought was put into the design to make sure that they enhance performance. You'll notice that the handle of the kettlebell is a little bit wider and the window is a different size than other typical competition kettlebells, and this is done in order to increase performance and decrease injury risk. The website says, the Vulcan Absolute Kettlebell not only places the load of the kettlebell further down the forearm at a stronger point, but distributes more of the weight onto the body of the lifter to increase comfort, control, and safety. This is really important if you're a kettlebell sport lifter, where overuse injuries abound due to the high volume of training. And even if you're not a kettlebell sport lifter, this is great because it means that there will be less pressure on your wrist anytime you're doing an exercise with the kettlebell in the rack position. These kettlebells have a really unique texture on the handle and the bell, making them feel grippier than other competition kettlebells. The website says, the surface of the Absolute kettlebell is blasted with micro glass beads to create a uniform texture that aids in gripping the handle of the kettlebell. So while it creates a better grip on the handle of the kettlebell, it also creates a better grip on the bell of the bell. So if you like doing exercises in the crush grip where you're holding onto the bell, it helps you have a better grip there as well. Now, taking a look at these handles, it looks like these handles are raw or unpainted, which is sometimes done with competition kettlebells to make sure that they really have the chalk adhere well, which is super important if you're lifting for endurance. That being said, these handles do actually have a light matte acrylic on them, but they can rust over time. So it's important to perform maintenance on the bells to make sure that doesn't happen. When you purchase the kettlebells, Vulcan actually sends out an email telling you how to properly maintain your Vulcan competition kettlebell. They recommend using non-chlorinated disinfectant wipes after you work out with the kettlebells to make sure to take off any sweat and ensure that there's no surface oxidation that happens. If the kettlebells do rust, it's as simple as spraying them with some WD-40 and then wiping the rust off with a rag. Now let's talk about the specs of these kettlebells. You can find it on the website, but to make it easy for you, I'm just going to list them here. So these kettlebells are constructed of steel with an unpainted steel handle, though as I mentioned, there is that light matte acrylic on it. The bell has a 35mm diameter handle at the dead center of that kettlebell handle. The height of the kettlebell is 280mm and the diameter is 200mm. The window is 65mm at the radiocarpal cup and 55mm at the apex of the core to dead center underside of the handle. If you don't know what that means, just look at the picture, it shows you. And finally, the bell has a hollow core construction, which just means that there's a hole in the bottom of the kettlebell, and most of the weight of the kettlebell is towards the top of the bell, and then the rest of it is hollow, depending on the weight of the kettlebell. Now, let's compare the Vulcan kettlebells to a few different types of kettlebells. Let's compare the Vulcan competition kettlebell to a cast iron kettlebell. These kettlebells are the same weight, but you'll notice there's a large discrepancy in their size. Cast iron kettlebells get larger as they get heavier, whereas a competition kettlebell stays the same size regardless of weight. So you'll notice that the bell is a lot smaller. It's also just solid cast versus this one is hollow cast. So this little one is going to be denser and feel a little more bottom heavy than the competition kettlebell. There's also a difference in the shape of the handle. So you'll notice that these handles kind of curve around versus the handles go straight down here. It's just a different feel. This curve can feel really nice if you're doing a goblet squat, but there's absolutely no reason why you can't do a goblet squat and it won't be comfortable with this kettlebell. There is a bit of a difference in the thickness of the handle as well. This one has a thicker handle, but that's going to change with the size of the cast iron kettlebell as the handles generally get thicker as they get heavier. Another obvious difference is that this kettlebell is just a black versus this one has a nice bright color. In general, competition kettlebells are going to be colorfully painted versus cast iron are going to be the same color, or they may have a stripe to indicate the weight of the kettlebell. If you'd like to see me do a more in-depth video on the difference between cast iron and competition kettlebells, let me know in the comments. Now let's compare the Vulcan Competition Kettlebell to a different type of competition kettlebell. This is a Kettlebell King's Bell. It happens to be a 4 kg instead of an 8 kg, but in general, comp bells are going to be the same size regardless of their weight, so we can compare these two here. So right off the bat, a few things that you notice is that the handle, the shape of the handle is different, the window size is different. So I'm gonna grab my handy dandy measuring tape here and we'll do a quick measurement. We're right a little over 4.5 inches for the width of this window versus we're over 5.25 inches. So this window is significantly wider here. And then we take a look at the height. This is a little over 2.25 inches. And this is a little under 2.25 inches. So it's also a little bit shorter than this one is, okay? So it's wider, but shorter this way. So that's definitely gonna make a difference in how the kettlebell is gonna sit in the rack position. So if you're a sport lifter, that's something to consider. I would say that the diameter of these bell handles is similar. This one actually I think is a 33 versus this one's a 35, but you can get King's bells in 35 millimeters as well. So that's pretty comparable. You do notice there's a little difference in as the handle connects to the body of the bell, it's straight and then it kind of goes out versus this one's just straight all the way down, maybe a little bit more ergonomic there. Another really important difference is that you have more space for two hands on the handle here on the Vulcan than you do on this particular bell. My pinkies are kind of getting pinched. It's hard to keep them on the handle. So that's something to consider if you use your competition kettlebell for two-hand swings or you do exercises where you switch hands. This is going to be wider and a little bit more comfortable. It's one of the reasons I love the Vulcan for kettlebell solo training, where we do a lot of exercises where we're switching hands and it's nice to have more space on that handle. Besides that, these bells are pretty similar in terms of their height, their width, the shape of the bell, and both of these kettlebells are hollow cast. Now, let's move on to a few considerations if you're a kettlebell sport lifter. Here are a couple specific considerations if you're either an experienced kettlebell sport lifter looking to add a Vulcan kettlebell to your collection, or you're a new kettlebell sport lifter in the market for competition kettlebells. As a kettlebell sport lifter, you know that just a little change in how the bell sits can make a big difference, especially over the course of a 10-minute set. Because the Vulcan kettlebell sits differently on your forearm, there is going to be an adjustment period. I would recommend going down in weight and working your way back up to your competition kettlebell so you give yourself time to adapt to the way that the Vulcan kettlebell sits on your forearm. If you're a new kettlebell sport lifter in the market for competition kettlebells, this is going to make less of a difference because you don't necessarily have an adaptation to a specific style of kettlebell yet. But I will recommend that you still take your time to allow your forearm to adapt to whatever type of kettlebell you use. Make sure to start light and work your way up over time. Let's talk value. The Vulcan kettlebells are some of the most affordable competition kettlebells out there, and they are a great value. At the time of recording this video, a 16 kg or 35-pound Vulcan kettlebell costs $92.99. Compare this to other comparable kettlebell brands such as Bells of Steel. A 16 kg costs $119.99, or Kettlebell Kings $152.99. Do consider that shipping plays a role in there, as the Kettlebell Kings kettlebell, that's $152.99, is free shipping. However, both Bells of Steel and Vulcan do not offer free shipping, but Vulcan is the less expensive of the two. Now it's time for pros and cons. Let's start with the pros. The Vulcan Absolute Competition Kettlebell is a high-quality competition kettlebell. It's a great value, one of the least expensive competition kettlebells out there. It has an ergonomic design made for increased performance and decreased injury risk. The Vulcan kettlebells have unique paint colors and texture. While these kettlebells are tailored to Kettlebell Sport, they're extremely versatile and can be used for hardstyle, kettlebell solo, kettlebell partner passing, fitness, you name it. Now, let's talk about the cons. There are shipping charges, whereas some kettlebell brands offer free shipping. The handles may slowly rust even if you keep them indoors. While you can do maintenance to prevent this, it may be a con if you prefer to have a no maintenance kettlebell. And lastly, there are no 4 or 6 kilogram kettlebell options, which is something that I recommend most for kettlebell solo, the style of kettlebell training I teach. So if you're looking for a lighter weight kettlebell, that is a con with the Vulcan Competition Kettlebell. The lightest they offer is an 8 kg or 18-pound kettlebell. Who should buy this kettlebell? 1, anyone looking for a high quality, affordable kettlebell that will last a lifetime. 2, someone who loves the aesthetics of having a beautifully bright colored painted kettlebell. And 3, someone who wants a versatile kettlebell that can be used for any style of kettlebell training. Who the Vulcan Competition Kettlebell is not for. 1, someone looking for a lighter weight competition kettlebell than 8 kilograms, as that is the lightest size that Vulcan offers. 2, someone who wants a no maintenance kettlebell, as the Vulcan kettlebells do require a little bit of maintenance to ensure that they remain rust free. 3, someone who's looking for free shipping. And 4, if you don't like bright colors, these kettlebells are not for you. However, Vulcan does have another competition style kettlebell that is in black only. And now let's take the Vulcan kettlebells for a spin, and I'm gonna share a few of my favorite kettlebell exercises. The wider window size definitely makes a difference on the snatch. It affects your insertion timing and the feel of the overhead position. While it was an adjustment to my technique, once I got the hang of it, it felt good. Similar to the snatch, there will be some adjustment on long cycle. For some reason, I had a harder time making a smooth adjustment on my insertion with the clean than the snatch. While it didn't feel bad, I liked the way the Vulcan felt on the snatch better than long cycle. As I mentioned earlier, the grippy texture of the Vulcan kettlebell makes it a great kettlebell for crush grip exercises. It felt very secure in my hands. I love the wider handle for two-hand swings. It felt very comfortable, and I was able to keep my fingers on both hands wrapped around the kettlebell handle. The Vulcan kettlebell is great for two-hand juggling because of the wider handle. I will say that for single-arm juggling, these bells aren't as forgiving. If you don't have the right timing or pressure when you start your flip, the kettlebell gets wobbly. So this may be a better option for more advanced jugglers who already have their technique honed in than beginners. Now, here are 4 of my current favorite kettlebell exercises. The shin thigh figure 8 is a great full body exercise, and it usually makes my glutes sore. As you can tell, it works your arms and your legs. Plus, it'll get your heart rate up. The shoulder rainbow is one of my favorite exercises for the shoulders, triceps, and obliques. The thigh rainbow is hands down the most famous kettlebell solo exercise. Everyone loves to hate thigh rainbows, they burn so good. The around the body handoff has gotten a lot of hate on social media, but I happen to think that this is a great exercise for improving balance, coordination, core strength, grip, rotational strength, proprioception, and body awareness. It took me a long time to get around to finally getting my hands on some Vulcan kettlebells and spending time training with them. I had heard mixed reviews over the years. I was pleasantly surprised to find that I absolutely love these kettlebells and I find myself gravitating towards them anytime I work out. The bright colors definitely have something to do with it. I recommend the Vulcan Absolute Competition Kettlebell because it's a great value. It works well for any style of kettlebell training that you do, and I love it for kettlebell solo, which is the style of kettlebell training that I do in my personal exercise routine and that I teach. Thank you to Vulcan for designing these kettlebells and especially for painting them in these bright, beautiful colors and for sending them to me and giving me the opportunity to review them. If you have any questions about the Vulcan Absolute Competition Kettlebell, let me know in the comments. And if you've already tried the Vulcans, I'd love to hear about your experience. Share it below. Until next time, KB Fit Britt, out! We should do that at the end. At the end, I should be like,